Hi, so let us begin with the first topic, that is about the institutions. Since we are going to talk about the social enterprise, we all know that social enterprises exist within the ecosystem. The term ecosystem basically means that there is social, economic, political and cultural milieu within which the social enterprises or any other institution within a society or a country exist. These social, economic, political, cultural conditions or preconditions determine the landscape in which the enterprises, both private and public, and now when we talk about social enterprises, flourish. So the institutional context of social enterprises or the ecosystem within which the social enterprises exist is very, very fundamental and essential to understand social enterprise itself. Now, how do you define institutions? Broadly speaking, there are two types of institutions in society. There are formal institutions and there are informal institutions. But if I have to theoretically define the concept of institutions itself, so institutions comprise of regulative, normative, cultural, cognitive elements that together and the associated activities and resources around it provide the stability and meaning to the social life. So social enterprise are actually crafted in a country to accommodate different contextual forces that shape it in the first order. Now, since I use the word formal and the informal institutions, what are formal institutions? So formal institutions are defined as structures of codified and explicit rules and standards and regulations that actually shape the interaction among societal members. The informal institutions, on the other hand, are the enduring systems of providing shared meaning, collective understanding, collective identity that will not be codified into a very documented rules and regulations, but rather reflect the societal or socially constructed reality that shapes the cohesion and coordination among the individuals and the society. Now, so the formal and the informal institutions together provide a perfect or an imperfect ecosystem for social enterprises. So thus, we are trying to make this case that social enterprises actually are determined by the structures, institutions, and the larger social, economic, and cultural milieu in which they exist. Now, so if you look at the diagram which is being shown at your screen right now, you will see that this basic diagram is providing you with the macro institutional processes and the paths which the various social enterprises can take. So we begin from the left side. So it says that there are cultural institutions, there are global, there are regional, local hierarchies or social classes, and there are political, economic institutions and also history of these institutions. Now, the next thing is that social enterprises or enterprises per se would also be influenced by the type of government. Whether the government is democratic, authoritarian, supportive, unsupportive, will determine the shape of the social enterprises which will get crafted over the period of time. And then you can see that it is diverting into two parts. That is, what is important here is to understand is the stage of economic development of that particular country. So what is the stage at which that particular country is? Is the country innovation driven, efficiency driven, or factor driven? And the fourth component, which is very, very essential to determine the role that a social enterprise can play within a society, is to understand what is a social society or the civil society like in that particular country. So the civil society again gets determined by whether the society itself or the government institutions are liberal, welfare, they believe in social democratic institutions, there is deferred democratization, or the society and the civil society is still traditional. So the model of social enterprises gets determined by the macro institutional processes, the meso institutional processes, and the micro institutional processes. Now, when we are talking about the institutions being a key determinant to decide the fate of social enterprises in a particular society, we need to introduce another concept, and this concept is of institutional voids. The term void itself means that there is a vacuum, or there is a gap, or there's something amiss. So institutional voids are basically impediments to a thriving market economy and cannot simply be mandated away. I mean, some societies would have these institutional voids, and you will see that many emerging economies, even though they have very modern structures and institutions, the efficiency and efficacy and effectiveness with which they work is often not at par. So there may be a condition that there may be institutions, but institutions' functional reality is not at power. So Peter Drucker, you have all heard of him. He wrote a famous essay in which he said, it's profit which strengthens the non-profit. So it's basically he's saying that profit and non-profit organizations are actually two binaries which are seen as antithetical but may not be so. He's basically saying that they can complement each other. He says, just to quote him, it's profitable for us to strengthen the non-profits. So basically what they are trying to underscore and emphasize is that it takes substantial amount of work, expertise and time for the countries to develop infrastructure and institutions which can address some of the substantial and critical social economic problems in the society. And as a social entrepreneur, or as anybody who is seeking to bring about a major change in society, spotting these institutional voids is critical. So institutional voids thus provide a crucial jumping off point for assessing the business opportunities, market conditions, and the risk involved.